Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pyi Nyein Aung, or Tiger, and I'm the Best Delegate Award winner at the ASEAN-China Young Leaders Summit 2021. Today, I'm here to talk about the lessons that I learned from the ASEAN-China Young Leaders Summit last year. Every year, the 10 head of states of ASEAN nations, they come together to convene an assembly of friendship and discuss the economic, political security, and social cultural development of our ASEAN countries. This started all the way back in 1976 in Bali, Indonesia, where the biannual ASEAN Summit meetings happened. These meetings are the highest policy-making bodies of ASEAN. They have been at the center of ASEAN's journey in achieving its goal and objectives. Today, the ASEAN summits and the related summits have been a focal point of international relations and also a platform for other world leaders to join in and discuss prominent regional and international issues. As an aspiring ASEAN youth, I was always fascinated by the yearly summits, watching them live on TV or reading through the chairman's statements that came out of these meetings. But learning from the paperback and watching through TV always left me curious as to how these meetings were actually conducted and what it felt like to be a leader representing your nation on that ASEAN stage. But in late 2021, I got my chance. I was accepted to participate in the ASEAN-China Young Leaders Summit 2021. The summit was a flagship program by the ASEAN Foundation and the Peking University of China that brought together university students from across the two regions in the form of a model ASEAN meeting. The summit was really an authentic replica of the ASEAN summits and allowed us to truly understand ASEAN affairs from a systematic viewpoint. Each participating student was given a role of representative from a given ASEAN nation, and we were allocated in a specific committee. So the whole summit was kind of structured similar to a model United Nations, MUN, but this summit was specific to ASEAN and included the specific ASEAN way of decision-making. And the committees that we were allocated in represented different levels of decision-making in ASEAN for each pillar of ASEAN, right? So the political security pillar, economic pillar, and the social political pillar. For me, I was fortunate enough to be chosen to play the role of the Prime Minister of Thailand as part of the highest decision-making committee in the whole simulation. And much like the real ASEAN summits, our ASEAN-China Young Leaders Summit also included a very comprehensive gathering of all decision-making bodies in ASEAN and included delegates representing different committees on behalf of different ASEAN countries. And so my journey with the Young Summit began. On the 23rd of September, 2021, the summit started with a fantastic opening ceremony in Beijing, China, where senior representatives from ASEAN and China enlightened us young leaders with insightful keynotes and welcoming messages. Already, right, at the beginning of the summit, the feeling of a great learning journey was starting to really kick in, and all of us young delegates were very nervous, but also excited to start our full-day journey as young leaders of ASEAN. Soon after the opening ceremony, we immediately got into action and started our model ASEAN meetings in each committee that we were allocated in. There, I first learned that the ASEAN way of decision-making was structured progressively, starting with the community councils of each ASEAN pillar that represented different interests of each ASEAN country. So these community councils included the different ministers of each ASEAN nation. Here, the community council meetings discuss some of the most pressing concerns and emerging opportunities of each ASEAN nation. And all the inputs from these community councils were then transferred onto each coordinating council of ASEAN. So these ASEAN coordinating councils, or ACCs, are actually responsible for discussing and addressing key priorities to ASEAN on a regional level. So essentially, these ACCs bring together the community councils under their specific ASEAN pillars. And then these ACCs, or the coordinating councils, then move forward and present deliverables for the highest decision-making body of ASEAN, which is the ASEAN Summit. In our case, the ASEAN plus China Summit. Here, role-playing the head of state of our representative countries, me and my fellow delegates in our committee undertook critical discussions on how each of the core issues presented by the different ACCs would impact ASEAN. Afterwards, we, as the head of states, discussed the proposed solutions presented by the councils as the final decision-making body to then generate chairman statements and also forward-looking statements. In terms of the economic pillar of ASEAN, we explored how we can promote economic integration between ASEAN and China to boost post-pandemic economic recovery. In terms of the political security pillar, we looked at how we can foster a safer cybersecurity environment and enhance monitoring of drug trafficking in the region. From a socio-cultural perspective, we look more on how ASEAN nations and China can come together to strengthen sustainable environmental management and also uplift people-to-people exchange between the ASEAN countries and China through education. As such, I was able to truly explore the intricacies of ASEAN decision-making and brainstorm with the like-minded candidates on some of the most pressing concerns that ASEAN faced. Modeling the head of state of Thailand, I was really able to sit in the shoes of a decision maker that had to protect the interests of my country while also being concerned about regional preferences as a whole. And just like that, the 4-day summit was a very fulfilling journey that really allowed me to understand how inclusive the ASEAN way is in terms of how the community councils work with the coordinating councils and then present solutions for the ASEAN-China Summit for consideration. I was also particularly captivated by the ASEAN method of using consensus to resolve conflicting opinions and also to promote effective communication between the decision-making bodies. And overall, the first and perhaps the most enlightening key takeaway for me was really how the summit fostered my understanding of ASEAN and the ASEAN way from a very systematic perspective. And the second and equally most important key takeaway was really understanding the power of diversity. As a region, ASEAN is home to 10 countries with very different economic, political, and social cultural backgrounds. We're home to over 680 million inhabitants, speaking over 1,000 languages. Our nations host 300 ethnic groups with different religious orientations. But while that diversity can sometimes be seen as a challenge, ASEAN really embraces it. And as an ASEAN youth exploring the ASEAN way, the summit was really another place that showed how diversity can really bring together the people of ASEAN and the whole region as a whole. We had students from all over the region, coming from different local and foreign universities, studying all sorts of majors with different career aspirations. For example, we had business students like myself, we had international relations students studying to become data diplomats. We even had medical doctors aspiring to make their parts by saving lives. So the ASEAN-China Young Leaders Summit really featured a very diverse bunch of young delegates. With my fellow delegates coming from such a very diverse background of education and life experiences, the summit was really a perfect emulation of how diverse ASEAN really is, and more importantly, how crucial it is to be inclusive in order to share and be more mindful about each other's differences. Interacting with like-minded youths in my committee and the country delegation really allowed me to take to heart and understand that different persons have different realities on how they view the world today. Knowing this really allowed me to be more open-minded and to cherish the differences and embrace the diversity instead of turning it away. Especially when we were exploring the different key issues under different ASEAN pillars, this diversity was really key to the success of our committee's model meetings, as different delegates with different backgrounds ultimately came together to come up with the best solution possible for the summit as a whole. So as a business student, I had great insights on economic development and financial integration, but things like the carbon market and credit system that we proposed would not be possible without my fellow committee delegate who was an environmental practitioner. And so just like that, diversity really helped out in our whole summit, and especially knowing that ASEAN also has a very proud mix of diversities across many different forefronts, it really compelled me to think that ASEAN youth can also cherish diversity just as much and use it as a catalyst for impactful change. And sharing and learning from one another was really the pinnacle of my ASEAN-China Young Leaders Summit experience. That ultimately was also the key to the successful completion of the whole event as well. And as per the theme of Cambodia's ASEAN chairmanship until 2022, my experience in the summit also reaffirmed that we are indeed stronger together as a group, as a region, and also as one ASEAN. Last but not least, the Youth Summit was also a very strong reminder that learning is, in fact, a constant and unpredictable journey. Even before the summit began, all of us delegates, we were assigned to roles in one of the many committees that address many different issues. Most of the delegates, including myself, we got to represent another country that was actually different from our nations of origin. So for example, I had to represent the Kingdom of Thailand, although I'm originally from Myanmar. So we were on a very fast-paced learning curve, and we had to put ourselves out of our comfort zones to come up with fruitful discussions. We were really able to push ourselves to think in other shoes and appreciate the different realities of others as one of our own. And this whole experience really allowed me to understand that sometimes learning is not as static as it seems, and that challenging ourselves can really allow us to do things that we didn't believe that we were actually able to do. It pushed me as an ASEAN youth to continue to learn and develop myself so that I can continue to make meaningful contributions in the creation of a prosperous ASEAN community as envisioned by our founders. In conclusion, the ASEAN-China Young Leaders Summit was a very memorable experience. I went from admiring the biannual ASEAN meetings on TV and reading the chairman's statements at home to actually role-playing one of the leaders and partaking in exact simulations of those meetings with like-minded youths from across the region. Truly understanding the intricacies of ASEAN affairs, learning to appreciate diversity as a catalyst for change, and realizing that learning is a dynamic journey are the three key takeaways that resonated with me after the summit. I made lifelong friends from China and different ASEAN countries that I'm still in touch with today. From Harbin, China to Bangkok, Thailand, from Luzon, the Philippines to Bali, Indonesia, I met amazing youths from all over our region that they were both capable and energetic. And the people that I met and the connections that I established in the summit was equally meaningful as the key takeaways that I gained from this wonderful experience. Ultimately, it was a socio-cultural exchange that instilled a very strong sense of ASEAN identity in me. And I strongly encourage fellow ASEAN youths to cherish diversity, challenge themselves, and also dare to do the same to get out of their comfort zones. Thank you very much.